There are moments in life when a single action, just one, can shake the entire world. And sometimes that moment is captured on camera. The internet woke up one morning to a video clip that spread like wildfire. A red carpet, flashes of cameras, screaming fans. And then, Robert Downey Jr., the beloved Iron Man, raising his hand and slapping a reporter. The world froze. The media exploded. Headlines shouted, "RDJ snaps." And what happened to Hollywood's favorite hero? People were shocked. Millions couldn't believe what they saw. Some were angry. Some were disappointed. Others defended him, refusing to accept what their eyes had just witnessed. But what really happened? What if that clip wasn't the full story? What if the truth was buried beneath layers of silence, misunderstanding, and pain? What if the slap wasn't about arrogance, but about protection? What if that moment, captured in just 6 seconds of shaky footage, held within it a story deeper than anyone could imagine? This isn't just about a slap. It's about a man who fought every day of his life, not just on screen, but off it. A man who fell, broke, rebuilt himself, and chose kindness again and again. And when the world turned its back on him, he still stood tall. This is the untold truth behind that viral clip. And once you hear it, you'll never see RDJ the same way again. The footage began just moments before the supposed slap. The red carpet premiere of a major Hollywood blockbuster was in full swing. Reporters swarmed like bees, each desperate to grab a moment. A quote, a spark of controversy. Fans screamed from the sidelines, their eyes shining with hope, just to get a glimpse of their favorite hero. And there he was, Robert Downey Jr., charming, composed, dressed in a sharp charcoal suit, his signature sunglasses in place. He was smiling, waving, shaking hands, living in that thin, suffocating line between being a star and being human. But what the video didn't show was everything leading up to that 1-second moment. Robert had just stepped out of a tense conversation with his manager. There was something about a rumor, a leak, a betrayal from someone close. He had barely processed it when he walked straight into a wall of flashing cameras and screaming questions. He had done this 100 times before, 1,000, but that night was different. A particular reporter, someone RDJ had encountered years ago, someone who once tried to dig up painful things from his past, was there. The man didn't just want answers. He wanted drama. He leaned forward, pushing others aside, holding his mic far too close, his smile sharp and fake. "Robert, how does it feel to play a hero on screen when you've failed so many times off screen?" The question sliced through the air like a knife. There was a pause. A long, painful pause. DJ didn't blink. His jaw clenched slightly, but he didn't speak. The reporter didn't stop. He kept going. "How did it feel to overdose in front of your child? Or to get arrested with heroin in your glove compartment? Do you think Disney just forgave you too easily?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. The security team started moving in, but RDJ raised his hand slightly to hold them back. He stepped closer, slowly, face to face with the reporter, the air between them charged with silence. There was no slap. Not yet, not yet. Instead, RDJ leaned in and said, barely above a whisper, "You have no idea what I went through to stand here right now." But the reporter smirked and whispered back, "Everyone has a breaking point." And that's when it happened. The reporter, unknowingly, or perhaps very intentionally, brushed past the line. His next words weren't caught by the microphones, but those closest to the scene heard it. A name, a woman's name, one that cut deeper than anything else could. "Your mother would have been ashamed." In that instant, RDJ's entire past came crashing back. The rehab centers, the isolation cells, the courtroom handcuffs, the tears of a mother who believed in him even when the world had given up. She wasn't here anymore. She had passed, carrying both pain and hope in her heart. And now her memory was being weaponized for a soundbite. The slap wasn't loud. It wasn't even hard. It was more symbolic than anything else. A response not to the reporter's insult, but to a lifetime of people trying to define him by his lowest moments. The cameras clicked. The clip began to spread before RDJ even left the carpet. News outlets twisted the story instantly. Actor loses temper. Violence on the red carpet. Unprofessional. The world judged, but very few paused to ask why. Because behind every outburst is a wound. Behind every moment of anger is a history of pain. Robert Downey Jr. didn't run from the scene. He didn't scream. He stood there quietly, the reporter stunned into silence. Security finally stepped in. The crowd watched in stunned stillness. DJ turned to the fans behind the barricade, removed his sunglasses, and gave a small, almost tired smile. Then he left. That night, his team advised him to issue a public apology. They told him it was the only way to contain the damage. But Robert refused. "I won't apologize for being human," he said quietly. "I've apologized enough in this lifetime." And he had. Years ago, when he was arrested, he apologized to the fans. When he missed his son's birthday from a court-mandated rehab center, he cried for hours and sent him a video saying sorry. When he broke down in front of a friend, drunk and high, he said sorry 100 times in the span of a minute. But this wasn't about shame. This was about dignity. But the internet isn't kind to dignity. By morning, memes were everywhere. Iron Hand. Tony Slark. People joked, laughed, edited the video with slow motion and dramatic music. The man who had inspired millions was now reduced to a viral punchline. But then something unexpected happened. An intern from that red carpet event posted a raw, unedited video of the entire incident. From the moment the reporter first spoke to the exact second after the slap. In the caption, she wrote, "I was right there." The reporter crossed a line. "This isn't what it looks like." Her post started gaining traction. Celebrities who had known RDJ through his darkest years began speaking out. Gwyneth Paltrow tweeted, "I know this man. He's one of the kindest, most grounded people I've ever met." Chris Evans posted a picture of them together with the caption, "Judge less, listen more." And slowly, the tide began to shift. Not everyone forgave instantly. Some still saw it as wrong, but more and more people started to remember who Robert Downey Jr. really was. Not the character, not the red carpet icon, but the man who had clawed his way back from the edge of death and turned his life into a story of hope. A few days later, RDJ sat down for an interview, not with a mainstream outlet, but with a small independent channel that had once featured his charity work. The host was gentle, thoughtful, and respectful. When asked about the slap, RDJ took a long breath and said, "I'm not proud of what I did, but I'm not ashamed either. I spent so many years letting people walk over me, say things about me, my past, my family. That night something inside me just said, enough, I didn't slap a man. I stood up for a lifetime of silence." The video hit 100 million views in a week. People listened. They saw not a moment of aggression, but a man's breaking point. They saw pain behind the glamour, strength behind the silence, and love behind the rage. And that's when the world began to see the full truth behind the viral clip. After that interview, something changed. Not just in how the world saw RDJ, but in how RDJ saw himself. For years, he had walked a delicate line, forever trying to earn back the respect he believed he had lost. The world had given him a second chance, but he had never truly forgiven himself. The slap, small as it was, became a strange turning point. It pulled open an old wound he thought had long scarred over. But now it was raw again, and this time he chose not to hide it. He didn't retreat from the spotlight. He didn't disappear like so many others had after controversies. No, he walked straight into the fire. Not to fight, but to tell his story on his own terms. 1 week after the incident, Robert surprised everyone by appearing unannounced at a small recovery center in Los Angeles, a top place where he himself had once sat in a cold chair, shaking, trying to stay clean. The room was filled with young addicts, broken souls, and people desperately trying to rebuild. And then he walked in. No cameras, no entourage, just him. He stood in front of them, not as Iron Man, not as a superstar, but as someone who had once been exactly where they were. "I did something last week I shouldn't have," he began. "And I want to talk about why." He didn't make excuses. He didn't blame the reporter. He talked about pain, about trauma, about how certain words can rip through you like you're still that scared kid, alone and addicted, begging for another chance. He talked about how years of therapy and healing can be shattered in an instant if you don't continue to protect yourself emotionally. And then he said something no one in that room would ever forget. "The world saw me raise my hand, but they didn't see how hard I tried to keep it down." Tears fell silently in the audience, not because they pitied him, but because they understood him. Every person in that room knew what it was like to be judged for a moment, while the world ignored the battle behind it. Word of that speech spread fast. Not because RDJ posted it, he never did, but because someone in the back, who was struggling to stay sober for even one more day, recorded it quietly. They shared it not to go viral, but to say, look, heroes can be broken too, and still be heroes. Suddenly people stopped talking about the slap and started talking about the message. News channels began replaying the full context. Analysts discussed emotional triggers, PTSD, the cost of fame. Mental health advocates praised RDJ for opening a door that many celebrities kept locked. But not everyone was on board. The reporter, now embarrassed and under fire, went on his own PR campaign. He claimed the clip was taken out of context. He said he was doing his job. He accused RDJ of being overly sensitive, of reacting violently, of damaging press freedom. DJ never responded publicly, but behind the scenes he sent the man a handwritten letter. It wasn't angry. It wasn't vengeful. It was honest. You struck a nerve I've spent decades trying to numb. I responded with a hand when I should have responded with words. But I hope someday you understand that not all wounds are visible. I forgive you. I hope you can forgive me. The reporter never replied, but years later in a quiet podcast he admitted that he had been wrong, that he was chasing clout, that he was trying to provoke a headline, and that RDJ's letter had haunted him ever since. Meanwhile, Robert's fans rallied behind him like never before. Fan art exploded across social media. Images of RDJ not slapping someone, but shielding someone, holding back tears, standing tall. He became a symbol again, not of perfection but of perseverance. The internet, so often a brutal and shallow space, became for a while deeply human. And then came the kid. A 13-year-old boy from Ohio sent RDJ a letter. It was scribbled in pencil, the handwriting crooked and shaky. Dear Mr. Stark, Robert, I saw your video and I just want to say thank you. My dad hits me when he's mad, but you showed me that it's okay to be mad and still be a good person. I want to be like you when I grow up. Not Iron Man, just you. That letter broke RDJ in the best way. He reached out quietly through his team, and 2 months later, the boy flew to California with his mother and spent the day with Robert at his ranch. They rode horses, they painted, they laughed, and before the boy left, RDJ gave him something small, but unforgettable, a handwritten note folded in a tiny Iron Man helmet. You already are like me. You've been hurt, but you're still kind. That's what makes you a real hero. The boy later said it was the first time he believed he could survive his home life. That one day he could get out. This is what the world didn't see. Behind the headlines, beyond the clip, they didn't see the chain reaction of healing that came from a single, painful moment. They didn't see the people who started opening up about their own trauma, about how words from strangers can resurrect demons they thought were buried, about how even a symbol like Iron Man can feel powerless in the face of grief. But RDJ showed something even stronger than superpowers. He showed restraint. He showed pain. He showed forgiveness. And in doing so, he gave people something they didn't expect to find in a celebrity slap scandal. Hope. Months passed. The viral moment faded from trending tabs, buried under newer controversies, fresher gossip, and the ever-churning wheel of internet outrage. But for Robert Downey Jr., the moment lingered. Not as regret, not as shame, but as a lesson. He had always known the cost of fame. But this time he saw the cost of vulnerability. In the weeks following the incident, Robert began doing something unusual for a man in his position. He started visiting schools, small theaters, addiction recovery homes, youth shelters quietly, unannounced, no media, no hashtags, just real people and real moments. One day he walked into a high school auditorium on the outskirts of Los Angeles. The principal had invited a guest speaker, but no one expected him. The gasps that filled the room when he walked on stage were followed by a stunned silence as he sat down on the edge of the stage, not behind a podium, not above them, but level with them. Let's talk about mistakes, he said. Not fame, not Marvel, not Hollywood, just mistakes. He talked about the time he broke his father's heart, the night he crashed his car into a tree and woke up not knowing where he was, the days he couldn't stop shaking because the drugs had eaten through every part of his sanity, the nights he thought the world would be better without him. And then he talked about rebuilding, brick by brick, word by word, apology by apology, and he ended with the moment that started it all, the slap. Everyone's seen the moment I lost control. What they don't see are the 1,000 moments I held it together. The room was silent. Some students cried. Others just stared at him like he was some kind of myth, now suddenly painfully human. A girl raised her hand and asked, "Do you think heroes are allowed to break?" RDJ smiled gently. "They don't become heroes until they do." That answer stuck. It echoed in classrooms, in homes, in journals, in therapy sessions. Because everyone, everywhere, was quietly battling something. And sometimes, knowing that even the strongest can break made surviving feel just a little bit easier. Meanwhile, the media began reframing the event. Not because they suddenly grew a conscience, but because something in the public had shifted. People were done with easy narratives, done with black and white morality. They wanted depth, and RDJ gave it to them. Not in press conferences, but in presence, in honesty. And then, one day, a video surfaced. Not a scandal. Not a hidden mic recording, but a clip filmed by a teenager in the waiting room of a children's hospital. Robert was sitting cross-legged on the floor, dressed in full Iron Man gear, not for a movie, not for a promotion, but for a child dying of cancer. The boy was 6 years old, too weak to speak, but his eyes lit up as RDJ walked in. Robert didn't talk about films. He didn't mention anything about the slap. He just sat there, holding the boy's tiny hand and reading him a storybook in a funny voice, making the child smile for the first time in weeks. The clip went viral for a different reason. People forgot the slap. They remembered the hand that held a child, the voice that comforted, the man behind the mask. In an ironic twist, the same internet that had once nearly crucified him now celebrated him. But Robert didn't let the praise get to his head. He had learned long ago that fame is a tide it can lift you high and then pull you under. What mattered more were the letters, the thousands of them, from men in prison who found hope in his story, from women who saw strength in his vulnerability, from teenagers who had been on the verge of giving up until they saw someone fall and still stand again. One letter came from an older man in Texas. "I slapped my son when I was drunk. He didn't speak to me for 12 years. After watching your story, I found the courage to call him. We talked for the first time last night. I didn't just see a celebrity in that clip. I saw myself. Thank you for reminding me it's not too late." Robert read that letter again and again, because in that moment he knew something had changed. He wasn't just a man who had played Iron Man. He had become, in some small and quiet way, a real-life symbol of redemption. Not through perfection, but through imperfection. Not through silence, but through the courage to speak. After falling, after breaking, after hurting someone, after being misunderstood. And then came the award ceremony. Months after the incident, he was honored at a humanitarian gala. Not for acting, but for his work in mental health and addiction recovery. As he stood at the podium, looking out over the audience filled with former addicts, counselors, fans, skeptics, and supporters, he paused. He didn't read from a script. He didn't talk about movies. He simply said, "If you only remember me for that slap, then I failed. But if you remember everything that came after it, then maybe it was worth it." The room rose to its feet, not because he was a star, but because he was real. And real, in a world drowning in filters and fakery, was revolutionary. Robert stepped off the stage and into the crowd, hugging strangers, laughing, crying. And somewhere in the back, unnoticed by the cameras, stood the same reporter from that fateful night, head bowed, clapping slowly. Not for a headline, not for a story, but for a man who reminded the world that being a hero isn't about never falling. It's about rising anyway. Life didn't slow down for Robert Downey Jr. after that. The movies kept coming. The calls didn't stop. The red carpets rolled out again. But something in him had changed. Not in a way the public could see, but in the quiet choices he made every single day. He turned down roles that glorified violence. He stepped away from scripts that were empty, loud, soulless. He sought stories that mattered, ones that could stir people, not just entertain them. He didn't need another billion-dollar franchise. What he needed was meaning, and then one day he found it. It came in the form of a letter, not a fan this time, not an addict, not a celebrity. It was from the son of the reporter, the same man Robert had slapped. The letter was short, shaky handwriting. No return address, My dad has cancer. He's not doing well, but he told me about you, about what happened. He said you were the only person he ever pushed too far and regretted it. He said the slap woke something in him, that he started therapy after that night, that he started becoming a better man. He doesn't say it out loud, but I think he's scared of dying with regret. If you ever think about him, know that he's sorry. Robert sat with that letter for a long time. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stared at the trembling ink on the page. 3 days later, he was on a flight. He didn't tell anyone. No entourage, no media. No intention of making it public. He knocked on the reporter's door in a quiet neighborhood in Portland. The man who answered was thin, pale, a shadow of the sharp-tongued provocateur from before. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Robert simply said, "I got your son's letter." The man nodded, stepped aside. Inside, they didn't talk about the slap. They didn't rehash the past. They sat at the kitchen table like two tired, old soldiers who had once fought on opposite sides. And slowly, piece by piece, they talked about childhood, addiction, fathers who left too soon, fathers who stayed too long, about the people they hurt when they didn't know how to protect themselves. The man finally broke down, whispering through tears, "I've lived my whole life thinking cruelty was strength. But when you slapped me, you didn't hit me. You stopped me, and I finally saw myself." RDJ didn't offer judgment or forgiveness. He simply said, "I know what it's like to live through shame. It either breaks you or rebuilds you." When he left that night, the two men shook hands. No cameras, no articles, just two deeply human beings, both changed by a single painful moment. Months later, the man passed away quietly. In his will, he left a note, "To the man I provoked and the world. Misunderstood, thank you for slapping me awake." Robert never shared the letter. He didn't need to, because by then he had already moved on, not from the slap, but through it. He continued working with young people in recovery. He funded programs for former prisoners trying to re-enter society. He visited families who had lost loved ones to addiction, just to sit with them in silence. No speeches, no interviews, just presence. The world remembered the clip, but Robert chose to remember the aftermath, because that's where the story really lived. It lived in the silence between two strangers finally understanding one another. In the hands he held, the tears he witnessed, the children he comforted, and the pain he transformed into purpose. Years passed. The slap became a story, a meme, a case study in public perception, in media bias and human reaction. And one day it became a movie, not a blockbuster, a quiet film, inspired by real events, written, directed, and produced by Robert Downey Jr. The story wasn't about the slap. It was about the man who slapped, the man who rose, fell, fought, and forgave. And in the final scene, the screen faded to black, with a single line of text. "Sometimes we raise our hands not to strike, but to stop what's breaking us inside." Audiences wept, not for the drama, but for the truth. Not because he was Iron Man, but because he reminded them that beneath every headline, every viral clip, every split-second moment of weakness, there is a whole world of history, a battle, a soul, a story. And in that truth, Robert Downey Jr. gave people something far more powerful than a superhero. He gave them permission to be human.